The church doors opened with a creak that seemed to echo through my entire soul. There, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, stood a figure I hadn't seen in 12 years. My father. But this wasn't the man I remembered from my childhood. His clothes were worn and patched, his hair unkempt, and he carried everything he owned in a tattered backpack slung over his shoulder. My breath caught in my throat as 200 wedding guests turned to stare. My soon-to-be husband, David, squeezed my hand, his family's horrified whispers reaching my ears. My mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore, actually gasped loud enough for half the church to hear. Before we dive into this life-changing story about family, forgiveness, and what truly matters in life, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. It really helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how my wedding day taught me the most important lesson about love, shame, and the courage to do what's right, even when everyone is watching. To understand why my father's appearance was so devastating, you need to know about the life I'd built, and the past I'd buried so deep I sometimes forgot it existed. I was marrying into the Whitmore family, one of the most prominent names in Charleston, South Carolina. David Whitmore was everything my teenage self had dreamed of. Handsome, successful, and from a family whose name appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. His mother, Margaret, was a socialite who chaired 3 different charity boards, and his father, Robert, owned the largest construction company in the Southeast. For the past 3 years, I'd been carefully crafting myself into the kind of woman who belonged in their world. I spoke differently, dressed differently, and most importantly, I'd told them a completely fabricated story about my background. According to the version of my life I'd fed the Whitmores, my father had died when I was 16. My mother, I claimed, had passed away from cancer 2 years later, leaving me to put myself through college on scholarships and determination alone. It was a tragic but respectable story, the kind that made wealthy people feel comfortable about your circumstances while admiring your perseverance. The truth was far more complicated and shameful. My real father, Thomas Mitchell, had been a construction worker who struggled with alcohol addiction for most of my childhood. When I was 16, after years of broken promises, missed birthdays, and nights spent wondering if he'd come home at all, he simply disappeared. One morning I woke up and he was gone. No note, no explanation, just an empty closet and a mother crying quietly at the kitchen table. He said he needed to figure himself out, Mum had whispered through her tears, said he was no good for us the way he was. That was the last time I saw him. Mum and I struggled financially for years after he left. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat while I focused on school, determined to escape the cycle of financial instability and broken promises that had defined my childhood. When Mum really did die of cancer 4 years later, I was truly alone. I'd worked my way through college, then law school, building a successful career as a corporate attorney. By the time I met David at a charity gala, I'd convinced myself that my painful past was completely behind me. If you're connecting with Rachel's struggle between her past and present, show some love with a like. Your support means everything. The first time I met David's parents, I was terrified they'd somehow see through my carefully constructed facade. We were at their country club for Sunday brunch, and I'd spent hours preparing. The right dress, the right makeup, the right answers to the questions I knew they'd ask. "So, Rachel, tell us about your family," Margaret had said, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy Southern women use when they're gathering information for judgment. I'd launched into my rehearsed story with practiced ease. I lost both my parents young, Mrs. Whitmore. My father passed when I was 16, heart attack, and my mother died of cancer 2 years later. It was difficult, but it taught me to be independent and value the family you create, not just the one you're born into. Margaret's expression had softened immediately. "Oh, you poor dear. How brave you must have been, putting yourself through college and law school all alone." Robert had nodded approvingly. "That kind of determination is admirable. Self-made success is the most meaningful kind." David had reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's one of the things I love most about Rachel. She's overcome so much and never let it make her bitter." I'd smiled and accepted their sympathy, their admiration, their approval, and with each telling of my fabricated story, it became easier to believe it myself. In my mind, the father who'd abandoned us really was dead. The shame and pain I'd felt about his drinking, his disappearance, his complete absence from every important moment of my life, all of that was buried so deep I rarely thought about it anymore. Our engagement lasted 18 months, during which I was fully absorbed into the Whitmore family and their social circle. Margaret planned most of our wedding with military precision, ensuring it would be the social event of the season. The guest list included senators, judges, business leaders, and social luminaries from across the South. The wedding itself was set to take place at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, the same church where David's parents had married 35 years earlier. The reception would be at the Charleston Harbor Resort, with a 7-course dinner, live orchestra, and flowers flown in from Ecuador. I'd found the perfect dress, a stunning creation by Vera Wang that cost more than my mother had made in 6 months at any of her jobs. My hair was styled by the same woman who did The Governor's Wife, and my makeup was applied by an artist who normally worked with fashion magazines. Everything was perfect. I felt like a princess stepping into her fairy tale ending. As I stood at the back of the church that morning, waiting for my cue to walk down the aisle, I truly believed I had successfully transformed myself. The scared, ashamed girl whose father had abandoned her was gone. In her place was Rachel Whitmore-to-be, successful attorney and perfect wife for Charleston's golden son. The church was decorated with white roses and baby's breath, the light filtering through stained glass windows, creating an almost ethereal glow. 200 of Charleston's most important people filled the pews, all dressed in their finest, all there to witness what the society pages would later call the wedding of the year. David looked incredibly handsome in his custom tuxedo, standing at the altar with his groomsmen. All fraternity brothers from the University of South Carolina, all from similar wealthy families. His smile was radiant as he watched me prepare to walk toward our future together. The wedding march began, and I took my first step into what I believed would be my perfect new life. And that's when the church doors opened. Time seemed to slow as I watched my father, the man I'd told everyone was dead, shuffle into the back of the church. He moved carefully like someone who wasn't sure he belonged, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine. Even after 12 years, even weathered and worn as he was, I recognized him immediately. He had the same green eyes I saw in my mirror every morning, the same stubborn cowlick that no amount of hair product could ever fully tame. The whispers started immediately. Margaret Whitmore's voice carried clearly through the church. "Who is that man? How did he get in here?" One of David's groomsmen leaned over to another. "Security should have stopped him. He's obviously homeless." I stood frozen at the back of the aisle, my bouquet trembling in my hands. Everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, every carefully constructed lie was about to come crashing down in front of 200 people whose opinions could make or break my future in this city. My father's eyes met mine across the church. In them I saw something I didn't expect, not the brokenness or desperation I'd imagined, but a quiet dignity and unmistakable love. He mouthed 2 words, "I'm proud." David turned to see what was causing the commotion. His expression shifted from confusion to concern, to something approaching horror as he took in my father's appearance and saw the recognition on my face. "Rachel," he called softly. "Who is that?" The entire church was staring now. The photographer, thinking this was part of the ceremony somehow, was snapping pictures. The wedding coordinator looked panicked, clearly unsure whether to call security or pretend this was planned. I had a choice to make, and I had maybe 30 seconds to make it. This is the moment that changes everything. If you're feeling the tension and can't wait to see what Rachel does, smash that like button. I could have denied him. I could have shaken my head, indicated to security that this man was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I could have continued with my fairy tale wedding and dealt with the awkwardness privately later. Margaret Whitmore was already gesturing toward the ushers, clearly expecting them to escort my father out. David's expression was pleading. Not angry, but desperately hopeful that this wasn't what it appeared to be. But as I looked at my father standing there in his threadbare clothes, holding his worn backpack, something inside me shifted. Yes, he looked homeless. Yes, he was embarrassing. Yes, his presence was going to complicate everything I'd worked so hard to build. But he'd come. After 12 years of absence, on the most important day of my life, he'd found a way to be there. I thought about the story I'd told about my dead father, and suddenly I felt sick. Not because he was alive and standing in my wedding, but because I'd been so ashamed of him that I'd killed him off in my mind. This man had struggled with demons I couldn't understand. He'd made mistakes that hurt our family deeply. But he'd also taught me to ride a bike, helped me with my homework when he was sober, and told me bedtime stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. I made my choice. I set down my bouquet, lifted the front of my wedding dress, and walked toward the back of the church. The gasps and whispers grew louder with each step, but I kept my eyes fixed on my father. When I reached him, tears were streaming down both our faces. "Hi, Daddy," I whispered. "Hi, baby girl," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You look so beautiful, just like your mother did on our wedding day." I turned to face the congregation, my arm linked through my father's. Every face in the church was staring at us with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to confusion. David walked down the aisle toward us, his face pale but determined. When he reached us, he looked at my father, then at me. "Rachel, I think we need to talk," he said quietly. I nodded. "David, I'd like you to meet my father, Thomas Mitchell. Dad, this is David, my fiancé." The words hung in the air like a challenge. David's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "Your father?" His voice was barely a whisper. "But you told us he was dead." "I know what I told you," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I lied. I was ashamed, and I lied to you, to your family, to everyone." Margaret Whitmore had made her way to the back of the church, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Rachel, what is the meaning of this? Who is this person, and why is he disrupting our ceremony?" I looked at this woman who had been planning to become my mother-in-law, who had spent months fussing over floral arrangements and seating charts, who cared more about appearances than almost anything else. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is my father. I told you he was dead because I was ashamed that he struggles with addiction and homelessness. I was so concerned with fitting into your world that I denied the existence of the man who gave me life." The church had gone completely silent. Even the wedding photographer had stopped taking pictures. My father squeezed my arm gently. "Rachel, honey, you don't have to do this. I just wanted to see you get married. I can leave." I turned to look at him, really look at him. His clothes were clean but worn. His hair was grey now, and his face bore the lines of hard living. But his eyes were clear, and when he looked at me, I saw nothing but love and regret. "How long have you been clean, Dad?" 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, he said without hesitation. "I've been trying to find the courage to contact you for over a year. When I saw your engagement announcement in the paper, I knew I couldn't miss your wedding day. I know I don't deserve to be here, but I had to see my daughter on the most important day of her life." The emotion in this moment is overwhelming. If you're feeling it too, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps us reach more people with stories that matter. David was staring at both of us, his face cycling through a dozen different emotions. His parents had joined us now, along with several of his groomsmen and my bridesmaids. We'd essentially created a receiving line of drama at the back of the church. "Rachel," David said slowly, "we need to discuss this privately." "No," I said firmly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of my father." David's jaw tightened. "Fine. Is any of what you told us about your background true?" "My mother did die of cancer. Everything else, I embellished or invented because I thought it would make me more acceptable to your family." Margaret made a sound of disgust. "So, you've been lying to us for 3 years, about something as fundamental as your family?" "Yes," I admitted. "I have." Robert Whitmore stepped forward. "Young lady, do you understand the position you've put our family in? Our friends, our business associates, everyone we know is here witnessing this spectacle." I felt my father tense beside me. and I realized he was preparing to leave to spare me further embarrassment. "Mr. Whitmore," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the church, "with all due respect, if you're more concerned about what your friends think than about the fact that I've been reunited with my father on my wedding day, then maybe we have different values about what's truly important." David grabbed my arm. "Rachel, can we please just table this discussion and get married? We can sort out your family situation later." "My family situation?" I repeated. "David, this man is my father. He's not a situation to be sorted out later. He's the reason I exist, and despite his problems, despite his mistakes, despite everything that's happened, he's here because he loves me." I looked around at the 200 wedding guests, all staring at us like we were performers in some kind of bizarre theater production. "I know this isn't what anyone expected today," I announced, my voice carrying through the church. "I know my father's appearance is shocking and uncomfortable, but sometimes life doesn't follow the script we write for it." I turned back to David. "I lied to you about my background because I was ashamed, but I'm not ashamed anymore. This man struggled with addiction, and it cost our family dearly, but he got clean, and he's been clean for 3 years. He came here today because he wanted to see his daughter get married, and I'm honored that he did." David's face was red with embarrassment and anger. "Rachel, you're asking me to accept that you've lied to me about something fundamental for our entire relationship, and now you want me to welcome this homeless man into our family on our wedding day." The way he said "this homeless man" made my blood boil. "His name is Thomas Mitchell, and yes, David, that's exactly what I'm asking you to do. Because if you love me, if you really love me, then you love all of me, including the parts I was too scared to show you before." David looked at his parents, then at his groomsmen, then at the crowd of 200 guests all waiting to see what would happen next. I could practically see him calculating the social cost of accepting my father versus the personal cost of rejecting him. "I need a minute," he said finally. He walked back toward the altar, presumably to think or pray or figure out how to salvage this situation. His parents followed him, and I could hear Margaret's voice rising in agitation as they huddled together. My father and I stood alone at the back of the church, the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. "I'm sorry, baby girl," he said quietly. "I've ruined your wedding." "No, Dad, you haven't. You've made it real." "What do you mean?" I looked around at all the expensive flowers, the designer dress, the perfectly posed wedding party, the congregation full of people who were more concerned with appearances than authenticity. "All of this," I gestured around the church, "it's beautiful, but it's not real. It's based on lies I told because I was ashamed of where I came from. You showing up today forced me to tell the truth, not just to David and his family, but to myself." My father's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted you to be ashamed of me." "I know, Dad, and I'm not anymore. I'm ashamed of myself for pretending you were dead when you were just struggling. I'm ashamed that I cared more about what these people thought of me than about being honest with the man I was supposed to marry." David returned from his conference with his family, his expression grave. "Rachel," he said formally, "I've discussed this with my parents, and we've decided that we should postpone the wedding until we can sort through these revelations." I felt my heart sink, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. "You mean until I can convince my father to disappear again so you don't have to be embarrassed by him?" "I mean until you can be honest about who you really are and what you really want." "I am being honest, David. For the first time in 3 years, I'm being completely honest." He shook his head. "No, Rachel. Being honest would have been telling me about your father 3 years ago. Being honest would have been trusting me enough to share your real story instead of making up a fairy tale." He was right, and I knew it, but his response to my honesty now told me everything I needed to know about who he really was. "You're right," I said. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I'm telling you now, and your response is to postpone our wedding because you're embarrassed." "I'm not embarrassed," he said, but his eyes said otherwise. "I just think we need time to process this." This is such a pivotal moment. What do you think Rachel should do? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're invested in this story. I looked at David. really looked at him. This man I thought I loved, who I thought loved me. Here was the test of everything we'd built together, and he was failing it spectacularly. Then I looked at my father, who was preparing to leave quietly to spare me further embarrassment. This man who had struggled with demons I couldn't understand, who had made mistakes that hurt our family, but who had fought his way back to sobriety and traveled across 3 states to be here for the most important day of my life. "David," I said quietly, "if you can't accept my father, then you can't accept me." "Rachel, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm asking the man I'm supposed to marry to accept that I have a complicated family history, and that sometimes doing the right thing is more important than maintaining appearances." I took off my engagement ring, the 3-carat diamond that had represented my entrance into the Whitmore family and everything I thought I wanted. "I'm sorry, David. I'm sorry I lied to you, and I'm sorry this is happening in front of all these people, but I won't marry someone who's ashamed of where I came from or who I really am." I handed him the ring and turned to my father. "Dad, would you like to get out of here and go get some coffee? I think we have a lot to catch up on." His face broke into the first real smile I'd seen from him in over a decade. "I'd love that, sweetheart." I took his arm, and together we walked down the aisle, not toward an altar and a new life built on lies, but toward the door and whatever came next. Behind us, 200 wedding guests sat in stunned silence. Ahead of us was uncertainty, difficult conversations, and the hard work of rebuilding a relationship that had been broken for 12 years. But for the first time in my adult life, I was walking toward something real. The next few hours were surreal. I changed out of my wedding dress in the church bathroom, putting on the simple sundress I'd planned to wear to the rehearsal dinner. Dad waited for me outside, and together we walked to a small diner 3 blocks from the church. "I can't believe you just did that," he said as we settled into a booth with coffee and pie. "I can't believe it took me this long to do it," I replied. We talked for hours. He told me about his journey to sobriety, the rehab programs, the relapses, the moment 3 years ago when he'd finally hit bottom and decided to fight for real recovery. He'd been living in a halfway house, working construction jobs when he could find them, and attending AA meetings twice a day. "I saw your engagement announcement in the Charleston paper," he said. "Someone at the homeless shelter where I volunteer had left it behind. When I saw your picture, saw how successful and beautiful you'd become, I was so proud but also so ashamed that I'd missed everything. Why didn't you contact me sooner?" "Because I didn't think I deserved to be part of your life. I figured you were better off without me, that you'd moved on and didn't need the complication of an alcoholic father who'd abandoned you." "Dad, I never stopped needing my father. I just convinced myself I didn't, because it hurt less than missing you." We cried together in that little diner booth, mourning the 12 years we'd lost and beginning to build something new from the pieces of what remained. The next few days were challenging. The story of the runaway bride who chose her homeless father over her wealthy fiancé spread through Charleston's social circles like wildfire. My phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, curious friends, and horrified acquaintances. I took a week off from work to process everything that had happened. Some of my colleagues were supportive, others were clearly uncomfortable with the scandal I'd brought to our prestigious law firm. David called several times, but I wasn't ready to talk to him. His family sent flowers with a card expressing their disappointment in how I'd handled the situation. Margaret Whitmore left a voicemail suggesting that my emotional instability had saved David from making a terrible mistake. But among the criticism and gossip, there were also unexpected sources of support. My closest friend Sarah called to tell me she'd suspected I wasn't telling the whole truth about my family, and was glad I'd finally been honest. Several colleagues shared their own stories of difficult family situations they'd hidden or minimized to fit into professional circles. Most surprisingly, I received a letter from Judge Patricia Morrison, one of Charleston's most respected jurists, who had been a guest at the wedding. "Dear Rachel, I witnessed what happened at your wedding, and I wanted you to know that your choice to stand by your father was one of the most courageous things I've seen in 30 years on the bench. In my courtroom, I see families destroyed by shame, addiction, and the inability to forgive. I also see the rare cases where love and courage overcome those obstacles. What you did took extraordinary strength and integrity. Your father's journey to sobriety is remarkable, and his love for you is evident. Don't let anyone convince you that choosing authenticity over appearances was wrong. If you ever decide to practice family law, I'd be honored to have you in my courtroom. With admiration, Judge Patricia Morrison. 3 months after my non-wedding, Dad and I had established a routine of weekly dinners and phone calls. He'd moved into his own apartment with help from a program for recovering addicts, and had found steady work with a construction company whose owner was also in recovery. I started seeing a therapist to work through the shame and abandonment issues that had led me to build my life on lies. It was painful but necessary work, helping me understand why I'd been so desperate for approval that I'd denied my own father's existence. David and I finally had the conversation we should have had years earlier. He apologized for his reaction at the wedding and admitted that he'd been more concerned with his family's reputation than with supporting me through a difficult situation. "I loved the version of you that you showed me," he said during our last conversation, "but I don't think I ever really knew who you actually were." He was right. I'd been so busy being who I thought he wanted me to be that I'd lost track of who I actually was. 6 months later, I made a decision that shocked everyone, including myself. I left the corporate law firm where I'd worked so hard to build my reputation and took a position with Charleston Legal Aid, working with families affected by addiction, homelessness, and poverty. The pay was a fraction of what I'd been making, but the work was meaningful in ways my corporate career never had been. I was using my legal skills to help people who reminded me of my father and myself and the struggles we'd both faced. My father was incredibly proud. "You're helping people like me," he said. "People who made mistakes but are trying to do better." "I'm helping people like us," I corrected him. "People who deserve second chances and support, not judgment." 1 year after my almost wedding, Dad and I attended his AA anniversary celebration. As he accepted his 4-year sobriety chip, he asked me to stand with him. "My daughter, Rachel," he told the group, "taught me that it's never too late to come home. She chose love over shame, truth over appearances, and me over a life that looked perfect but wasn't real. I'm proud to be her father and grateful every day that she didn't give up on us." 2 years later, I did get married to Michael Torres, a social worker I'd met through my work at Legal Aid. Our wedding was small and simple, held in the same diner where Dad and I had our first real conversation after the church incident. 20 people attended, close friends, my father, Michael's family, and Judge Morrison, who officiated the ceremony. I wore a simple dress I bought off the rack, and the flowers came from the grocery store. It was perfect in every way that mattered. Dad walked me down the aisle, all 12 feet of it in that little diner, with tears of joy streaming down his face. When Judge Morrison asked who was giving me away, he said proudly, "Her father, who's grateful beyond words to be here." In his wedding speech, Michael said, "Rachel taught me that real love isn't about accepting only the perfect parts of someone. It's about embracing their whole story, including the chapters that are painful or complicated. Her courage to choose authenticity over appearances is just one of the reasons I love her." What do you think about Rachel's choice? Would you have done the same thing? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on these powerful stories. Looking back now, I realize that my father showing up at my wedding was the greatest gift anyone could have given me. Not because it was comfortable or easy, but because it forced me to confront the lies I'd been living and choose between the life I thought I wanted and the life that was actually mine. I'd spent years trying to escape my past, convinced that where I came from determined where I could go. But the truth is, our past doesn't define us. Our response to it does. My father made mistakes that hurt our family deeply, but he also fought his way back from those mistakes and found the courage to show up when it mattered most. His love for me was strong enough to risk public humiliation and rejection, and my choice to stand by him, to claim him publicly as my father despite his struggles and my embarrassment, taught me something profound about what love actually means. Love isn't just accepting someone when they're perfect and presentable. Real love is choosing someone when they're flawed, struggling, and inconvenient. It's valuing truth over appearances, authenticity over approval, and relationships over reputation. If this story is resonating with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that challenge us to think about what really matters in life. Every day, we are faced with choices between authenticity and approval, between truth and convenience, between love and shame. We decide whether to embrace the messy, complicated parts of our lives and families, or to hide them away and pretend they don't exist. I spent 3 years living a lie because I thought it would make me more lovable, more acceptable, more successful. But lies, even beautiful ones, can never build the foundation for real happiness. They just create a house of cards that will eventually collapse. The morning I chose my father over my fiancé, I also chose truth over fiction, love over fear, and authenticity over approval. It wasn't easy, and it came with real costs. A lost relationship, social embarrassment, professional complications, but it also gave me something priceless, the chance to live as my real self, to love and be loved for who I actually am, and to build relationships based on truth instead of carefully constructed facades. We all have parts of our stories that we wish were different, family members who embarrass us, backgrounds we'd rather hide. But those struggles and imperfections are part of what makes us human. When we deny them, we deny part of ourselves. Where I am today, 5 years later, my life looks nothing like the fairy tale I thought I wanted, and I couldn't be more grateful. Dad and I have dinner every Sunday. He's been sober for 7 years now and works as a sponsor for other people in recovery. He's proud of the work I do, and I'm proud of the man he's become, not despite his struggles, but because of how he's overcome them. Michael and I are expecting our first child, a daughter we plan to name Hope. Dad is over the moon about becoming a grandfather and has already started building her a crib with his own hands. I love my work at Legal Aid. Every day I get to help families navigate crises involving addiction, homelessness and poverty, the same issues that once brought shame to my life. Now they're the source of my purpose and passion. David married a Charleston socialite 18 months after our non-wedding. According to mutual friends, it was a beautiful ceremony with no unexpected guests. I genuinely hope they're happy together. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen differently that day. If I'd asked my father to leave, married David, and continued living the lie I'd so carefully constructed. I think I would have spent the rest of my life feeling hollow, always afraid that someone would discover who I really was and decide I wasn't worthy of love. Instead, I chose the harder path, the path of truth, authenticity, and unconditional love. And I discovered that real love, the kind worth having, doesn't require us to be perfect. It just requires us to be real. What's the most important lesson you're taking from Rachel's story? Have you ever had to choose between authenticity and approval in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives. The most beautiful part of this whole experience is that it taught me the difference between being loved for who you pretend to be and being loved for who you actually are. The first kind of love is fragile and conditional. It depends on maintaining a perfect image and never revealing your flaws or struggles. The second kind of love is unshakable. It sees your imperfections, your difficult family, your complicated past, and chooses you anyway. It's the kind of love my father showed me when he risked everything to be at my wedding, and the kind of love I showed him when I chose truth over appearances. Thank you so much for watching this emotional story about family, forgiveness, and the courage to be authentic. If it touched your heart or made you think about your own relationships differently, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We share powerful stories like this every week because we believe that everyone deserves to know they're worthy of real, unconditional love. So until next time, remember, you're not defined by your past mistakes or your family's struggles. You're defined by your choice to love authentically, forgive courageously, and live truthfully. The people who truly matter will love you not despite your story, but because of it. Don't forget to comment where you're watching from and share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. See you in the next story.